Something is carving perfect circles out of killer whales. Not scratches, not tooth rakes from another orca, not the torn, irregular wounds you would expect from a large shark. These are clean craters, round sections of tissue removed from the body of one of the most powerful predators in the ocean, and some killer whales carry dozens of them. That should not make sense. An adult orca can weigh several tons. It hunts in coordinated groups, learns specialized techniques from other members of its pod, and can target animals that most marine predators would never approach. Yet, across different oceans, researchers keep finding the same signature on their bodies, a circle, sometimes fresh, sometimes healed into a pale scar, a small piece missing from an enormous predator. So what is biting killer whales? The obvious answer would be something equally powerful. Another large shark, another massive predator, something capable of confronting an orca and surviving. But that assumption is the first mistake, because the animal responsible does not need to confront the orca. It does not need to overpower it. It does not need to kill it. It only needs a few seconds, and the animal doing this can be shorter than your arm. A shark roughly half a meter long, small enough that beside a killer whale it almost disappears. That contrast is what makes the wounds so strange. A killer whale is built around strength, speed, intelligence, and cooperation. The attacker is built around one thing: taking a piece and leaving. Researchers studying killer whales have documented characteristic circular wounds across an enormous geographic range. One scientific review compiled almost 200 marks from 120 individual orcas. Some wounds healed over a period of months. Others remained recognizable for years. And hidden inside those scars was another clue. Killer whales photographed near Antarctic waters sometimes carried old circular marks without obvious fresh wounds. That matters, because the shark responsible is associated mainly with warmer oceanic regions. The attack probably did not happen beside the Antarctic ice. The wound happened somewhere else. The whale traveled. The scar traveled with it. The shark did not. Remember that, because those circles will eventually reveal far more than what bit the whale. But first, we need to understand what kind of predator can exploit an animal this large. And this is where the question changes. The important question is not, what can kill an orca? We already know a healthy adult killer whale is extraordinarily difficult for another predator to kill. The better question is, what can take one mouthful from an orca without needing to win a fight? Once you ask that, the evidence begins to make sense. Similar crater-like wounds appear on dolphins, sperm whales, large baleen whales, tuna, billfish, seals, and other sharks, animals that share almost nothing in common. Some are enormous, some are incredibly fast, some dive deep, some occupy the upper levels of the marine food web themselves. Yet the same basic mark appears on all of them. A round piece of tissue missing that tells us something critical. The attacker is not specialized in defeating killer whales. It has evolved a feeding method that can work against many large moving animals. The victim does not need to die. In fact, killing it would often be unnecessary. The predator needs only to reach the skin, attach, cut, take a piece, then disappear. The shark responsible is called the Cookiecutter shark. Its scientific name is Isistius brasiliensis. And when you finally see one, the mystery becomes even stranger. Its body is narrow and cigar-shaped. An adult is usually only around half a meter long. Beside a killer whale, it looks more like something the orca could swallow than something capable of leaving a permanent mark on it. Yet this tiny shark has evolved one of the most unusual feeding systems in the ocean. It does not need the strength of a great white. It does not need the speed of a mako. It does not need the intelligence or cooperation of an orca, because it never intends to stay long enough for those advantages to matter. The secret is hidden inside its mouth, and once that mouth closes on a much larger animal, size stops being the advantage we expect it to be. Null. The cookie-cutter shark does not look particularly dangerous until its mouth opens. Around the jaws are thick, fleshy lips. They help the shark form a tight seal against another surface. Inside, the teeth are divided into two very different weapons. The upper teeth are relatively small. They help the shark maintain its grip. The lower teeth are something else entirely. Large, triangular, packed together into a continuous cutting edge. Instead of behaving like a collection of individual teeth, the lower row works almost like a blade, and this is what creates the famous crater. The shark reaches a much larger animal and presses its mouth against the skin. Its lips help establish suction. The upper teeth provide additional purchase. The lower cutting edge penetrates the tissue. Movement of the jaws and body helps remove a rounded plug. Then the shark releases. The result is the perfect circular wound that gave the species its common name, cookie-cutter, as though someone had pressed a circular cutter into the animal and removed one piece, except the material is flesh, and the animal carrying it usually survives. That survival is not a failure of the attack. It is part of what makes the strategy work. Think about what a conventional predator faces when it attacks something enormous. A whale can weigh tens of tons. Killing an animal that size requires time, energy, and risk. Even after the kill, the predator has to feed from a body far larger than it could possibly consume quickly. The cookie-cutter avoids that entire problem. It does not need the body. It needs only what fits inside one bite. The whale keeps swimming. The shark keeps the meal. That means an enormous living animal becomes something completely different from conventional prey. It becomes a moving source of tissue. A cookie-cutter can remove one piece without ever attempting to kill the animal carrying it, and the same victim can accumulate multiple scars over its lifetime. This is why saying the shark hunts killer whales can create the wrong image. It is not chasing an orca through the ocean and trying to bring it down. It is exploiting the orca. One brief encounter, one small piece, then separation. The lower teeth are so important that even their replacement is unusual. Like other sharks, cookie-cutters continually replace worn teeth, but much of the lower cutting row can be shed together, and specimens have been found with old teeth inside their stomachs. Scientists have proposed that swallowing those discarded teeth may help recover minerals, such as calcium. The shark builds a cutting edge, uses it, replaces it, and may even recycle part of the material. But the mouth creates another mystery. We now understand how the cookie-cutter cuts. We still have not explained how it reaches the animals it feeds from, because many of its victims are much faster than it is. A killer whale can easily outswim a cookie-cutter. So can tuna. So can many large pelagic sharks. This animal is not shaped for long, high-speed pursuit. If it had to chase an orca across open water, the strategy would collapse. So it does something completely different. It does not spend its life chasing horizontally after giants. It moves vertically through the ocean. During daylight, cookie-cutter sharks are associated with deep water, far beneath the bright upper layers. Then night begins, and one of the largest movements of animals on Earth starts around them. Every evening, countless small fish, squid, crustaceans, and other organisms rise toward shallower water. Predators follow them. Before daylight returns, many of those animals descend again. This movement is known as diel vertical migration, and the cookie-cutter participates in it. At night, the shark can rise hundreds of meters toward shallower layers. Suddenly, an animal that spent the day in deep water begins overlapping with a completely different community. Tuna, dolphins, sharks, whales, perhaps killer whales. It does not have to chase these animals across the ocean. It moves into the layers where they may already pass. That transforms the problem. The cookie-cutter needs only an opportunity. Get close enough. Attach, cut, release, move away. The entire interaction may last only moments, and that is where the orca's overwhelming advantages begin to lose their importance. Strength matters if there is a prolonged fight. There isn't one. Speed matters if there is a long chase. The Cookiecutter avoids one. Cooperation matters when a pod can coordinate against an opponent. But what happens when the attacker is already gone? The Cookiecutter does not defeat the killer whale. It avoids the kind of confrontation the killer whale is designed to win. And darkness makes that possible. But darkness also creates a problem for the shark, because even at night, the ocean above is not completely black. Viewed from below, an animal swimming overhead can become a dark silhouette against faint light from the surface. For a small shark surrounded by much larger animals, being visible can be dangerous. So the Cookiecutter has evolved another adaptation, one that sounds almost impossible the first time you hear it. This shark produces its own light, null. Much of the underside of the Cookiecutter shark is covered with tiny organs called photophores. They produce a faint greenish glow. At first, that seems completely backwards. Why would a small shark living among much larger predators illuminate itself? Because in the deep ocean, producing light can sometimes make an animal harder to see. Imagine looking upward through dark water. Far above you, faint light still filters down from the surface. Now place an animal between you and that light. Its body blocks part of the glow. It becomes a silhouette, a dark shape, moving across a slightly brighter background. For a predator, that silhouette can reveal prey. For prey, it can reveal danger. Some midwater animals reduce that contrast through counter-illumination. They produce light on their underside that resembles the weak light coming from above. The goal is not to light up the ocean. The goal is to erase the shadow. The arrangement of photophores on the Cookiecutters belly is consistent with this kind of camouflage. The shark carries a source of light that may make its outline more difficult to distinguish from below. But then there is the dark collar. Near the throat is a band where the glowing pattern changes, and this feature has produced one of the most famous theories about the Cookiecutter. The idea goes like this. If much of the shark's underside blends with the light above, the darker collar may remain visible. From below, that small dark shape could resemble a small fish, an easy meal. A larger predator approaches, and when it gets close enough, the apparent prey attaches to the predator instead. The hunter becomes the surface being bitten. It is a spectacular idea. It also needs to be treated carefully. Scientists have not conclusively demonstrated that the dark collar works as a lure. The photophores are real. Counter-illumination is well supported. The darker collar is real, but the idea that this patch specifically attracts large predators remains a hypothesis. And that uncertainty reveals something important about this entire animal. We know far more about what the Cookiecutter leaves behind than we do about the exact moment of attack. Think about how difficult it would be to witness one naturally. You would need to be far offshore, at night, in deep water, beside a large, moving animal. At the exact moment, a shark barely half a meter long approaches, and then the interaction may be over in seconds. Most of the time, scientists do not see the Cookiecutter feed. They see the result. The shark disappears. The wound remains. A circle becomes evidence. And that creates another question. How often does the strategy fail? We do not know. And that is precisely the problem. A successful attack leaves a visible crater. That wound may remain recognizable for months or even years. A failed attempt may leave almost nothing. No obvious scar, no shark to observe afterward. So the evidence naturally records successful bites much better than unsuccessful ones. Mechanically, several things still need to happen correctly. The shark must approach, make contact, maintain its grip long enough to remove tissue, then separate from an animal that may outweigh it by several thousand times. That is a narrow window, and every second of contact potentially exposes the cookie cutter to something far larger and more powerful. Its strategy, therefore, appears built around minimizing the encounter, not winning, ending. That idea becomes even clearer when we look at what the shark eats, because despite the famous marks on whales and orcas, the cookie cutter does not depend entirely on giants. Its diet is broader. Specimens have shown evidence of smaller prey such as squid, fish, and crustaceans, animals the shark can consume much more conventionally. That makes ecological sense. The open ocean is enormous. A small shark cannot depend on encountering a whale every night. Large animals may be separated by huge distances, so biting a giant is not the shark's only way to feed. It is an opportunity. During its vertical movements, the cookie cutter passes through layers containing many possible sources of food. A squid can be swallowed. A small fish can become an entire meal. A whale offers something different, one piece, and energetically, that opportunity is extraordinary. The cookie cutter does not have to kill an animal thousands of times larger than itself. It does not have to defend a carcass. It does not have to consume an enormous body before competitors arrive. The tissue is already there. The giant animal built it, transported it through the ocean, and brought it within reach. The cookie cutter needs only to take what it can use. This is not the strategy of a predator that dominates the ocean. It is the strategy of an animal that found a loophole, and eventually, that same loophole brought it into contact with something completely different. Not another whale, not another shark. Us, null. Cookie cutter bites on living humans are extremely rare. That matters from the beginning. This is not a shark that routinely patrols coastlines looking for swimmers. Most people simply do not enter the environment where the shark normally feeds. Cookie cutters spend much of their lives offshore and at depth. They rise toward shallower water mainly during darkness. Humans usually swim close to shore during daylight, and for limited periods. Our worlds rarely overlap. Long-distance ocean swimmers can change that. In 2009, a swimmer attempting to cross the Alenuhaha Channel between Hawaii and Maui was bitten during a nighttime swim. The injury showed the distinctive circular loss of tissue associated with a cookie cutter bite. Other reported cases followed, but the number remains extremely small. That is important because the story does not need exaggeration. The remarkable thing is not that cookie cutters regularly attack humans. They do not. The remarkable thing is that the same feeding system used against whales can work on us when we enter the correct environment. Deep water, offshore, darkness. For a whale weighing many tons, the loss of a few centimeters of tissue is proportionally small. For a human body, the same bite can produce a much more serious wound. The shark did not become stronger. The victim became smaller. Several Hawaiian incidents have occurred during very dark conditions. There are too few cases to claim that darkness alone determines an attack, but the timing is consistent with the shark's normal vertical movements. Night is when the cookie cutter rises closer to the part of the ocean humans occasionally enter, and humans introduced something else into that habitat: machines. Historical reports have attributed crater-like damage on rubber-covered underwater equipment to cookie cutter sharks. Sonar-related components and other exposed materials have returned with rounded sections removed. That created one of the most famous stories surrounding the species: a shark small enough to hold in two hands, damaging sophisticated submarine equipment. The popular version sometimes makes it sound as if cookie cutters deliberately hunted submarines. That obviously is not what is happening. The shark has no concept of a submarine. It encounters an object inside its environment, a surface, a material it can grip, something producing sensory information. Exactly what causes a cookie cutter to test a particular artificial object is not fully understood, but its mouth is capable of interacting with materials other than animal tissue. And that leads to an extraordinary comparison. A feeding mechanism evolved to remove pieces from whales can also remove pieces from equipment designed by humans. The shark has not changed its strategy, only the surface has changed. But there is something more important about these bites than damaged equipment. The scars on living animals persist, and a scar can travel. Remember the killer whales near Antarctica, the old circles, the absence of fresh wounds, the shark associated with warmer water. Now the pieces begin to connect. If the cookie-cutter bite occurred somewhere warmer, the whale may carry that mark for months or years afterward. Researchers can photograph an individual animal repeatedly. At one sighting, a particular scar may not exist. At another, a fresh wound appears. Later still, the same wound is healed. Each photograph is connected to a location and a date. Combined with other evidence, those changes can help researchers understand where the animal may have traveled. The cookie-cutter bites for food, but unintentionally it can leave a biological marker. The shark takes one small piece. The whale carries the shark's signature across an ocean. That transforms the scar. It is no longer just evidence of an attack. It becomes information, and this may be the strangest consequence of the entire feeding strategy. A predator most scientists almost never see hunting naturally can help reveal the movements of animals far larger and more visible than itself. The cookie-cutter disappears into darkness. Its bite keeps traveling, but before returning to the killer whale, there is one larger idea hidden inside all of this, because the cookie-cutter forces us to reconsider what an apex predator actually is. No, we often imagine the ocean as a hierarchy, small animals at the bottom, larger predators above them, then sharks, and eventually something like the killer whale at the top. The strongest animal wins. The apex predator becomes untouchable. But real ecosystems do not work like a tournament. Being an apex predator does not mean nothing can ever exploit you. Parasites feed on predators. Small organisms take blood from animals millions of times heavier than themselves. Scavengers consume what hunters leave behind. Cleaner species approach dangerous animals that could kill them easily. Evolution does not require one species to defeat another before it can obtain food from it, and the cookie-cutter makes that impossible to ignore. A shark roughly half a meter long can leave a permanent scar on a killer whale weighing several tons, not because it is stronger, because strength is almost irrelevant to the interaction. Think about the advantages of an orca: power, speed, intelligence, social learning, cooperation. Those traits make killer whales extraordinarily effective against prey that must be pursued, controlled, or overwhelmed. But the cookie-cutter presents a completely different problem. The orca's strength is useful in a fight. The cookie-cutter does not want one. The orca's speed is useful during pursuit. The cookie-cutter does not need a long chase. A pod can coordinate against a visible target. The cookie-cutter may remain beside the whale only briefly before separating. It has not evolved a better version of the orca's weapons. It has evolved around avoiding them. That distinction is why this story is so different from a conventional predator versus predator encounter. The cookie-cutter does not dethrone the killer whale. The orca remains one of the dominant predators of the ocean. The tiny shark simply exploits an ecological opportunity that the orca's normal advantages cannot eliminate completely. And the same mechanism works against many other animals: large whales, fast fish, dolphins, seals, sharks. That tells us the feeding system is not an orca attack adaptation. The cookie-cutter has a general method for exploiting large moving animals. Find an accessible surface, establish contact, remove tissue, leave. The victim can be radically different from the previous one. The basic strategy remains the same, and because the victim often survives, its body becomes a record of the encounter. Some scars are fresh, others have almost disappeared. Scientists can photograph those marks and identify individual animals. Over time, the skin becomes something like an archive. a history of contact written in tissue. This is especially useful because the cookie cutter itself is so difficult to observe. Much of its life happens far offshore, at depth, in darkness. Researchers often have to reconstruct its behavior indirectly, from the structure of its mouth, from stomach contents, from captured specimens, from characteristic wounds, from the geographical distribution of those wounds. The shark is strangely absent from much of its own story. We know it through fingerprints, and several important questions remain open. Exactly how frequently does an individual cookie cutter feed from large animals? How does it select the final target? How close does it get before contact? How important is its bioluminescence during the final approach? Does the dark collar really play a role in attracting larger animals? How many attempts fail without leaving evidence? These are difficult questions because the behavior happens in one of the hardest places on Earth to watch. But uncertainty does not weaken the story. It is part of the story. The cookie cutter exists in a region of the ocean where evidence often arrives after the animal responsible has already disappeared, and that gives the final image much more meaning. A killer whale surfaces beside Antarctic ice. The cookie cutter shark may be thousands of kilometers away. Perhaps it never entered those freezing waters at all. Yet the orca still carries the circle, a tiny mark from a completely different ocean. And once that circle heals, it can remain there long after the moment that created it has vanished. The shark gets one meal. The whale carries the evidence. And suddenly, the smallest animal in this story tells us something about the journey of the largest. Null, return to the beginning. A killer whale rises through cold Antarctic water. Several tons of muscle, a sophisticated brain, a predator capable of learning from its family and adapting its hunting methods to different environments. From a distance, almost nothing about it appears vulnerable. Then the animal rolls, and the circles appear, small, pale scars across black skin. Now we know what they mean. At some earlier point in the whale's journey, perhaps thousands of kilometers away, in warmer water, a shark barely half a meter long reached its body. The encounter did not need to last long. Contact, attachment, the lower teeth cut, a piece of tissue disappeared. The shark separated. The orca continued swimming. That is the entire confrontation. There was no battle for control of the ocean. No enormous secret predator powerful enough to overpower a killer whale. No hidden animal sitting above the orca on an imaginary food chain throne. The answer was almost the opposite. An animal so small that fighting the orca would be impossible. So evolution gave it a strategy where fighting was unnecessary. That is the real brilliance of the cookie cutter shark. It does not overcome size. It makes size less important. It does not overcome strength. It avoids the moment when strength could be used. It does not outrun the fastest animals in the ocean. It moves through the water column until an opportunity comes within reach. And when the opportunity appears, it wants only one thing: a small amount of tissue. Then separation. The killer whale never stopped being an apex predator. The cookie cutter never became one above it. They occupied different ecological roles, and for a few seconds in darkness, those roles intersect. Then the evidence begins moving. The wound closes. The whale travels. Weeks pass, months, perhaps years. A scar that started somewhere in warm oceanic water crosses thousands of kilometers. Eventually, scientists photograph it beside Antarctic ice. The shark itself may never come anywhere near that place, but its signature has arrived. That is what makes the cookie cutter so unusual. Its feeding event can last seconds. The evidence can last years. The shark can disappear completely. The bite remains visible, and that bite can reveal not only what happened to the whale, but something about where the whale has been. The cookie cutter has no idea it is creating information. It does not understand migration. It does not know researchers identify individual killer whales from photographs. It does not know a wound can become useful evidence. It simply feeds. Yet the result becomes a biological record. That circle is simultaneously an injury, a meal, and a clue. And perhaps that is the best way to understand this shark. Not as a monster, not as the secret predator of killer whales, not as something more powerful than the largest hunters in the sea, but as an extreme specialist, a shark whose entire body solves one very specific problem. How do you feed from something that could kill you instantly? You do not kill it. You do not fight it. You do not stay. You take only what you need, and you disappear. The thick lips help establish contact. The unusual teeth cut. Its vertical movements bring it into the same layers as much larger animals. Its photophores help reduce its silhouette in the dark, and its small size, which seems like an overwhelming disadvantage at first, becomes part of the strategy. A great predator announces itself. The Cookiecutter barely needs to be noticed. And somewhere in the open ocean tonight, the same process may happen again. As sunlight disappears from the surface, enormous numbers of animals begin moving upward through the water column. Fish, squid, crustaceans, the predators following them. And among those animals may be a small cigar-shaped shark, its underside producing a faint green glow, its specialized teeth hidden inside a mouth built to attach. Above it, something enormous moves through the darkness. Perhaps a tuna, perhaps a dolphin, a whale, maybe even another killer whale. There is no need for a dramatic chase, no fight between evenly matched predators, no struggle for dominance, only proximity, a few seconds, contact, a bite, then the small shark disappears beneath the giant. The wound remains. Days later, healing begins. Months later, it becomes a scar. Years later, that same circle may still be visible on an animal swimming through a completely different ocean, and someone looking at a photograph may realize that the scar has traveled farther than the predator that created it. That is the contradiction at the center of this animal. The Cookiecutter is too small to defeat most of the creatures it feeds from, so it evolved a way to feed without defeating them at all. The killer whale keeps its position at the top. The Cookiecutter keeps its mouth full, and the ocean keeps the scar, because the Cookiecutter shark never needed to defeat the ruler of the ocean. It only needed a few seconds in the dark,